Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Sunoikisis Digital Classics. Today it is our sixth session of the summer semester 2020, and today our guest is Farnoosh Shamsian from Leipzig University. She's a PhD candidate in Leipzig, and we have a session about digital classics and learning ancient Greek in Iran. So Farnoosh has been working a lot on these aspects for teaching, sorry, ancient Greek in Iran to Persian speakers, and we already had in the past in Sunoikisis classes and sessions about these topics. So I'm very, very happy to welcome back Farnoosh, because in this semester, which is, well, I have to say a special semester around the world, Farnoosh is teaching, and she has new data and a new experience for her work on teaching ancient Greek in Iran. And as usual, you have the class outline in GitHub. So you already have also the slides and a complete description of the session outline. So we will see the importance of learning Greek for Persian speakers, challenges, of course, for teaching and learning ancient Greek, doing digital classics, and also concrete examples, especially for linguistic annotations and translation alignment. You have also links, okay? You can follow these links with concrete examples for this work. And then you also have seminar readings and other readings, and also an exercise for experimenting with this topic. But now, okay, Farnoosh, welcome back to Sunoikisis. I think you can start. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as Dr. Berkin mentioned, I would like to discuss the digital classics and learning Greek for Persian speakers, and especially Persian speakers who live in Iran. And firstly, I would like to say that this session is on the results of the course that I started teaching online, actually at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has been going on about 2 months. And I will be mainly discussing the methods that we used, mostly the digital tools that we used in this course, and the results, especially the translation alignments that a student did as a midterm exercise or practice in a way. So I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, now we have your screen. Yes.
Great. So first, let's start by discussing the outline of the session. So I will be discussing the importance of learning Greek for particularly for Persian speakers, and then reviewing the challenges that one needs to face when learning Greek in Iran. While talking about the limitations of learning Greek in Iran, we will be also talking about the available resources and how to benefit from them for learning Greek. And then I will get to my main subject of discussion, that the methods of teaching I used in the ongoing online course, and the employment of translation alignment as a tool for learning Greek. And finally, contemplating on the early results of the course, which are actually, I will be discussing through the translation alignments that the learners did. So for the first part, I would like to emphasize on two aspects which learning Greek would be of a special importance for an Iranian or Persian speaker in general. One of them is the importance of a Greek text for the study of history of Iran, since many great historians, such as Herodotus or Xenophon, play a very important role on how we actually understand the history of Persia. And the second aspect is the impact of Greek philosophy on Islamic philosophers and Iranian philosophers, for example, Avicenna. And since such impact is very consequential on how we understand Islamic philosophy, uh, it would be a subject of interest for many scholars and students who study Islamic philosophy as well, which is a course offered quite a lot in different universities in Iran. And finally, although I mentioned only philosophy and history, many different fields and many scholars, depending on the research interest, may find it necessary to learn Greek as well. So this is, in addition to the usual interest in the Greek literature or philosophy, if we add this aspects as well, uh, we can see that the challenges of learning Greek in Iran uh, would be, learning Greek in Iran would be quite challenging. So I would like to discuss the challenges that actually the classical studies in Iran has. Uh, the main challenge, and I think the most important one, is the limited number of courses and teachers. So no university or school actually offers a course in ancient Greek and in general in classics. And the number of courses that actually exist are very limited, usually as an extracurricular course, and mainly in certain cities, in Tehran, for example. And attending these courses usually is on a certain time span. So, for example, if somebody is not living in Tehran or couldn't attend at that exact timing, they probably lost their chance to learn Greek by attending a class. Add to this that there are many unfamiliar concepts in Greek grammar for Persian speakers. For example, Persian doesn't have definite articles or gender or case. Also, the use of participles and optative mood actually and subjunctive mood is very limited. And this is a problem when somebody wants to learn ancient Greek by self-study. So they have to, in a way, to try to get accustomed to these concepts, probably through another language, for example, English. And for accessing up-to-date resources, for example, textbooks, even in English, German, French, or other languages, unless they are digitalized and they're digitized and available on the internet, which probably cost a fortune to actually purchase them. And so they wouldn't be very up to date in a way, since if the copyright has already expired. Um, Indirect translations is the next problem. So many of the books originally written in Greeks have been translated to Persian, but through indirect translations, through German, French, English, actually mainly English. And for somebody who wants to learn Greek using translation alignment, an indirect translation usually doesn't align perfectly with the English, with the original text. And sorry, I forgot the last one. And the last point is the lack of teaching resources, which is probably obvious from the previous points. Uh, there's no lexicon, and there's only one textbook available in Persian, which is a translation of these three books you can see in the slides. First, Greek for Beginners, Primer of Greek Grammar, and the third one, An Introduction to Ancient Greek by Loshnik. So these three books have been translated to Persian by Jared Blake and Iman Chafi Bey in one volume. So since it's a textbook that is a translation, of course, it has certain limitations, especially, for example, in exercises. But at the same time, it's not open access. And so we couldn't actually use this book in our course, the online course that is ongoing. So another source that is available is Persis, which is a online self-study course written all in Persian. I started Persis as a self-study course 2 years ago for students to be able to access Perseus Digital Library and use the data available on Perseus much easier. Perseus only has grammatical descriptions of certain concepts, and it may not be sufficient to be used as a self-study course on its own, but as in a way a short introduction to grammar, and just so that the learners can use other tools, mostly digital tools, to expand their knowledge on Greek. You can see the URL in the title, actually. So in addition to these problems, we have certain books that are actually translated directly from Greek to Persian. And you can, to my acknowledgement, this list is all that is available as direct translations. And as if you notice by the name of the translators, you see that the number of translators is quite limited. So although we have 7 books, we have actually only 4 translators. Yes, I think so. Yeah. And some of these books cannot actually be used in a Greek course, since the text is not ideal for such purpose. For example, starting to learn Greek with Aristotle's Metaphysics, although we have a direct translation in Persian, probably wouldn't be the best introduction, and probably wouldn't be interesting for all of the learners. So maybe learners who have a philosophy background would be interested to learn metaphysics even as a start, but probably students of history in this course wouldn't find much interest. And some of these books actually are so if you notice, we have on the second book is the Pre-Socratic Philosophers, which is a extensive book with direct translations of some fragments of pre-Socratic philosophers. At the same time, we have a book, Fragments of Heraclitus, which is translated by another translator, Dariush Dervishi. And I find it very interesting how and there is a very increasing interest in reading Heraclitus in Iran. So then, with all this in mind, I would like to get on to the explaining how the course that I teach in the past 2 months has been going on, and how I think digital classics can fill some of these gaps that we have in classical studies in Iran. And I look at this course as, in a way, as an experiment to see how current tools available, digital tools available, can uh, help us fill these gaps for Persian speakers, and how we can actually implement more innovative tools that can be used in different languages. So the first source that we used was lemmatized text and lexicon and translations, all that are available in Perseus. So mostly the translations are to English, either French or German, and at the same time, the lemmatized texts have descriptions also in English. So in a way, even if the course is holding general in English, in Persian, the learners need to know at least some basics of English language. So I have tried to use as many open access resources and digital tools as possible in this course. And since the course have been held online and of course free of charge, uh, it would be much more accessible, um, in general, accessible to actually to anyone who has access to internet. So the problem of, for example, if it was a course held in Tehran, it would be much more difficult for many to access this course unless I actually have made an online version as well. In addition to this, I think using these digital tools make it much more uh, easier to meet needs of different students. So, I actually had a student who wrote me an email telling me that after, I think, the fifth session, fifth or sixth session, that they wouldn't need to continue the course, since what they wanted to actually, how I learn from Greek, is already achieved. So they were interested in finding and tracing back different Greek words in different texts, on a certain text actually, and seeing how it has been translated to Persian. And this is what we discussed on the fourth session. So I thought it was interesting that using these digital tools could be actually sufficient for some of the learners, so they didn't need to actually continue learning Greek. So in addition to the lemmatized text and translations on Perseus, we used different tools that Perseus actually offers, so especially the vocabulary tools. And we also used tree banks. So I had the chance to sit through Professor Crane's course, and I actually look at my online course as in a way, Persian replica of his course, and since the syllabus was quite similar, I just held it in Persian, and he actually used Professor Gorman's tree banks and made them into a spreadsheet with a certain identification number for each words. So it would show which word is dependent on which. But since it was in a spreadsheet, students could actually make their own copy and add comments. For example, they would change the short definitions for each word into something that was more compatible with the translations and with the original text. And they would, for example, add comments on inflections and things like that. So we add both. We actually use both the tree banks and the spreadsheet that Professor Crane made for his own class. We also took advantage of translation alignment by using Ugarit. So I actually made an alignment for section 3 of book 1 of Thucydides, which we used in the class. And I also had a session teaching them how to use translation alignments in case they wanted to use it for as a tool for practicing Greek by aligning the Persian or an English translation. We also used digitized grammar books as a reference, since actually using the translation of Imam Shafi Beg and Janet Blake was a bit difficult. And in a way, with the numerous grammar books available, although they're in English, probably not necessary. And finally, I used Persis for quizzes. So I actually put up quizzes on Persis so the students can actually use it online as well. So this is the short introduction on the content of this course. Of course, we started by introducing the alphabet and went on to talking about the most common verbs and nouns and adjectives in the text. After that, we get on to talking about the basic principles of grammar, especially this is the part that I actually talked about cases, since I mentioned before Persian doesn't have cases or genders, and probably this is something a bit difficult at the start for any learner who actually hasn't worked with a language with cases before. After that, we went on to verbs, and we actually learned only the third person singular and plural of present, aorist, and imperfect. This is actually what Professor Gorman also did in her own open access Greek course, which she went through her materials as well, and has helped me a lot to see how to actually work on this course. After the verbs, we went to first and second declension. I forgot to add the reason why we learned only the third person singular and plural of these tenses, these three tenses, is that the data showed that about more than 60% of the verbs were actually third person singular plural of these three tenses. So by learning only third person singular at the beginning, the students could actually understand the inflections of about 60% of the verbs. After the verbs, we went on to the first and second declension, and we learned the endings for third declension with about 2 or 3 examples from different nouns. And in addition to all this, of course, there was numerous instructions to how to use various digital tools. Um, so it was actually one of the main subjects. So I every session I introduced in a digital tool, and I made a short introduction to how to use them. Either was it, for example, at the beginning, was it Perseus to how actually look up something in the look up a word in the lexicon, or on the last session on how to do an alignment on a Ugarit. So um, I'm going to go to the alignments. And before that, I would like to go to the quiz that we did in both of the courses. So I had the chance to ask Professor Crane's students in his last class in Pragmatic Introduction to Ancient Greek to do this short quiz. And then I translated the exact same quiz into Persian and asked the students in my online course to do this. And I got to compare the results to see what are actually the differences. It was interesting to me that I couldn't get out much out of it. So, for example, there were certain questions that everybody answered correctly. For example, the first two questions, although I tried to make it a bit more difficult on the second question. So I asked about two verbs in one question, but everybody answered these correctly, and almost everybody, well, most of the learners couldn't get for example, the fourth question right, where I asked them to uh, translate these two sentences. So they usually couldn't understand why. For example, the first sentence starts with Athenaioi and the second one starts with Athenaios. At the same time, actually, I need to add that this quiz was taken quite early on the course. So, of course, if it was a bit later, they could answer all these questions. But comparing the translations, for example, these exact questions, or actually, this is not a translation. I asked them to change the verb on this sentence to an imperfect, which of course was a quite difficult question for that level. But even from their mistakes, I couldn't exactly. What I got out of it was that so they didn't know which part of this verb they need to take out and how to actually change it to imperfect. And the same went on for translations and writing questions. So from multiple choice questions, apparently they did much better. What I want to get at by comparing these two is that I didn't see much differences in the results of a quiz like this with multiple choice questions and translation or writing questions. Uh, but I saw many differences when comparing their alignment. So I think about 4 sessions after these tests, both the learners in my class and Professor Crane's students were asked to align the first paragraph of Thucydides. And I compared these alignments done by these students, and I noticed many interesting differences that I think uh, shows that, firstly, apparently nobody aligns like anybody else. So apparently, looks to me, every learner has their own style of aligning the translation. So either they understand the text and the translation in their own way, or they actually have a different approach to alignment from each other, or there's a third option, both. And I would go with the third option. So I think not only they have different understanding from both in this case, the Persian translation and the Greek text, they have a different approach to alignment as well. Um, Comparing this, I would like to start with a very simple example, the article. So uh, here is, let's start with the English, actually. Here, uh, in this alignment, we have the article, the first article of the sentence in ton polemon, which we have ton aligned with the in English. So of course, we don't have a definite article in Persian, but at the same time, I like to also mention that the learner who did this alignment was actually originally an English speaker, but the two other examples that I have, actually, I think the English is not their mother tongue. I find it interesting that in this alignment, we have tone polygon and dwar in as a one segment. And on the third translation, you see it's not only the war, but the history of the war. And same goes here. Xtunegrapse with Ton Polemon that wrote the war. And this is actually my alignment. So I use Ton Polemon with Jangi Ra in Persian, because the Jangi means war, and Ra is a postposition that shows that Jang here, war, is actually in accusative in a way. So here to the alignments with the Persian translation. Same thing exactly happened. So this learner actually aligned to exactly like me, Ton Polemon with Jangira. Second one, Ton is actually aligned with asked, which is. And same here. So in a way, it's not possible. Either the article needs to be left out or needs to be aligned with Polemon. So although it actually doesn't have an equivalent in Persian. So another example is the other article, so Ton Polemon, which is of the Peloponnesians. And I see here of the in English has been added to the alignment. So to Peloponnesion is of the Peloponnesian. See, here has been a mistake. So uh, same here. Tone is not aligned with anything, and here also. So actually, if we look at it this way, the way the article is aligned is how the person aligning is understanding article. That's why I think we can approach alignment not only as a way of, for example, learning vocabulary, which is actually a subject of research for Mariam Foradi, who actually works at the University of Leipzig in our department, using Ugarit and in general translation alignment for as a vocabulary learning tool. But I see that I think it has potentials to be used as a way of learning grammar as well. And in addition to the learning, looking at the translation alignment as a learning tool, of course, it can help the learners to understand which part of the text uh, has been translated in which way, and which part uh, either has not been translated at all or has been translated very differently. It's a very common phenomenon when we have an indirect translation. For example, I think it's a very interesting example to look at this exact alignment, since you see the percentage of text being aligned is quite low. And in a way, this is the part that I was talking about. That I think the approach of each learner to alignment, translation alignment itself, could be quite interesting. So, for example, in the Persian translation, we don't have this exact phrase starting from hosso epolemeson pros allelus. That actually, in a way, doesn't exist in the Persian translation. It has been implied, but it's literally not translated. If you look at my alignment and how I understood the text, you see I actually couldn't align this part with any part of the text, and uh, I couldn't get to a word level alignment on some parts. For example, if you look at this words, you see that I have 4 words in Persian aligned with this, because the Persian words actually means from all of the previous wars. But we have one definite article and one word in Greek. Uh, so this is actually one of the good examples, because partly in some parts I couldn't actually uh, align it on a word level on each part. So I had to, for example, align 3 words in Greek, for example, with 2 words in Persian. This is a problem of having an indirect translation, but at the same time, of course, I have, although at the time that the learners were doing their own alignments, they didn't have access to my alignment here. So I actually did this um, quite recently. They had to find out which part of the Greek text means exactly what. So if we have actually this part, hos polemeson pros allelus, exists in Persian, has been aligned in Persian. So the phrase as they ward against each other uh, actually has been aligned here, and I think in every, yes, some translation actually don't have it, but in English we actually have this phrase, but not in Persian. Uh, Another interesting example at the final part of this text, when here when it says "Tomen iuthus to de kai dianomenon," I see probably it would be very difficult to find a translation for Tomen and Tode, but we have an alignment for iuthos and dianomenon. It has been translated in Persian in actually the Euthrosis has been translated quite close to Greek, means without hesitation, or the last one, the onoumenon, later. So later is not the translation for this word, but uh, it has, in a way, it conveys the same meaning. Uh, so I want to use this example to discuss a very interesting point that although a quiz with translation exercises and, for example, multiple choice questions gives me some information on which parts of the text or which parts of the question the learner understand, and where they actually have problem getting the answer right. I don't see the process of their learning in a way, and I don't see the which parts they actually understand, but at the same time they're getting help from the translation, for example, to guess, for example, the tense of the verb or something like that. Alignment, in a way, gives me much more information on the learning process of the students. Here's an example that we have here, to, the article aligned with some, in Persian exactly, again, aligned with some. So this phrase has been translated to Persian as some without hesitation at the beginning of the quarrel, and some a bit later. That's the translation of how I would actually translate that Persian translation to English. Then we have men and there together aligned with then in English, and digar, which means others, other, sorry, in Persian. I actually would probably never translate the combination of men and there to digar in Persian, and I haven't. I think I have here the Greek core vocabulary list that Dickinson I found in the Dickinson College commentaries, and I translated it to Persian. And number 11, we have Mende. I didn't put digar as an equivalent. But now that I see it in this translation, I think it can be a quite suitable translation actually for this word. Yeah, this was my alignment I was talking. Another interesting thing here is that I actually didn't explain how Mende actually works in Greek, except that a very, very short introduction on this. That this is, they actually always come together on the second position. And I haven't discussed how articles can be used in different meanings in Greek. So to be more clear, this is the part that I actually haven't talked about in the online course. This is either the result of the repetition of these subjects, that this phrase has been aligned correctly without previous knowledge, or we can actually use alignment and look at alignment as a very interactive learning tool. And at the same time, it shows to me, as someone who's observing the learning process, that the learner who is aligning the text is quite aware of for example, that probably this word here, which has been aligned with intending so to do in English, is not the exact equivalent of what we have in Persian, which means a bit later. But at the same time, it's quite actually it's close enough. So this is one of the examples that I find quite intriguing. And although it would be very difficult to uh, have by machine learning actually work on translation exercise. So to use translation exercises to understand which part of the text or which part of the lesson the learners didn't actually understand would be a very difficult task. But with translation alignment, this task would be much easier, both for the teacher and in case we are actually using a digital course for actually by machine learning and for a computer to understand. And I just wanted to point out that it seems to me that translation alignment as an exercise may have and may actually give us much more opportunities for evaluating the learning process of users or learners. So in addition to this, of course, translation alignment can has its own usual applications as well. I remember that very early on Professor Crane's course, I think on the second session, as we were comparing the translations, we got into the discussion of we get the text, to show it on the text, that here we have the word history that has not been aligned. And we don't actually have this word in the original Greek text. So what we have in the Greek text is that Thucydides wrote the war of Peloponnesians and Athenians. So we don't have the word. He wrote the history of the war between Peloponnesians and Athenians, and this is an interesting observation and probably very exciting observation for somebody who has just started to learn Greek. And I look at these opportunities that we have by using digital tools as a great way to really motivate students as well. Um, so so far, this we had 5 sessions after the student did this alignment in the online course I had in Persian currently having. What I would like to do after a few sessions is to ask a student to actually revise the alignment to see what they would change. So, of course, they probably wouldn't change their approach to alignment. For example, I know that the learner who did this alignment actually doesn't find an exact equivalent for this word. Uh, why Epolameson has not been aligned? Because it actually doesn't exist in Persian, but at the same time, some of these words actually exist in Persian. They just are not the exact word. So they may convey different meanings. So in a way, let's put it this way, that some of the learners are much more pickier when aligning these translations. What I would do is that I would go to from word level alignment. I would go to a much larger, for example, a phrase level alignment when I see that the text actually don't match exactly. That's what I have done in, for example, in my, for example, here you see, I usually have, for example, here, four words with four words in Persian because I don't see any way to align it. So another learner might actually say, okay, it doesn't have the same meaning, so it doesn't align. That's something that I actually understand as a part of this learning process. Um, in a way, there is no right or wrong in most cases when somebody is aligning. Uh, Depending on their approach, they may not actually get the meaning of a certain noun or verb, but at the same time, they may actually do not align it since the translation does not match. So it would be, for me, interesting to see what would be the result if we were aligning a direct translation that would match with the Greek text. And uh, actually, I didn't do an alignment and use it in class from a direct translation, but one of the learners actually did. So they actually aligned a few sentences here, which seems to align quite um, closely. So this is a direct translation by Sharaf Khorasani. This is actually, we saw the name of this translation in the slides. And as you see, firstly, so the sentence is much shorter. Of course, it's probably much more easier to align it when we have only three words in Greek. But at the same time, it does align much more closely. Well, for example, here we have almost every word aligned, and it would be interesting to see what would be the result of alignment of the exact same paragraph of Thucydides. And in addition to that, uh, to see if the students actually see what they've got wrong and what mistakes they have did in the first alignment that they did. So I would like to uh, close with saying that since this course is ongoing, I would like to how actually what are the prospects that we can have for this. Uh, Firstly, of course, there are many more digital tools that we can use. For example, we can use digital maps that are available. We can add audio, and we can add much more annotations to the text. This would, in the long run, probably solve a great part of the lack of resources for Persian, as the number of the learners actually increases. We probably would have much more resources available. For example, we have alignments of few fragments by one learner, and as the number goes up, the amount of, for example, aligned translation probably would go up, and that would help a lot for database. And of course, we will be working with tree banks much more closely in the sessions that we have ahead of us. So, stop sharing my screen, and
Okay. Okay, Farnoosh, thank you very much. Really, it was great. So it was great to see all these examples and your experience. So we have people on YouTube, so please ask questions and well, in the meantime, waiting for people writing their questions in the chat. I have many questions, of course, but the first thing is this. At the beginning, you mentioned the reasons for learning ancient Greek, especially, okay, for Persian speakers, if they, of course, have an interest in history, philosophy, which is also the reason why also, well, speakers in Western countries should learn Farsi. So this is, of course, the side. But my question is, okay, we have these specific reasons. So you also mentioned the challenges and the difficulties that you still have in Iran for accessing resources, etc. But my question is about students. So these students, they are undergraduate students, graduate students. I'm using, of course, these English terms. Or do you also have passionate people wanting to learn ancient Greek? So can you give us an overview about your students, the age also maybe, and their background?
I think it would be interesting to see how broad is the audience for ancient Greek. Most of the people interested in learning Greek usually are students of history and philosophy, and also ancient Iranian languages. But I noticed, and mostly graduate students.
Okay.
But for example, I remember on my first Greek course, I had one of my former professors in my class. It was really an honor to see them there. But I just want to say that I think since it's not limited to a certain age group, we have, for example, scholars who have been working for a very long time on a certain field and feel the need to learn Greek. So it's not specified to a certain group, but mostly graduate students, mostly philosophy, and then history and Asian languages.
Okay, this is the reason why I was asking, because I knew that this is not a course for a specific group of people, but I was curious to see how people not belonging to a specific group in the academic world can join this course. And I already know that in Tehran you have been doing many things in this sense. Also, other colleagues of yours have been developing in the past, and I think also now courses, extracurricular courses, so inviting people. So I think this is really a great thing. And of course, the opportunity to use digital tools now is great, because of course you can involve more people. And in general, because we are now discussing about a country and speakers of a specific native language, but we are in the world in this semester in a special situation where, of course, thanks to the digital technologies, we can involve more people, and this is a good way for experimenting in this sense. So thank you for your answer. And of course, this is also connected to the other, I have to say, interesting thing, because you mentioned that there are students, well, abandoning the course after learning a specific, I don't know, topics of task or tasks. So this is, I have to say, interesting in some way, because so probably they have a specific interest in a specific words or other parts of the grammar, and then they consider, and it's okay. So I think, but I think this is interesting also, considering the kind of course. So maybe for the future also to see, okay, there are different levels, different students interested specifically in a part of the language, and then they are happy with that, and maybe they will come back. So
Uh,
um,
that's actually one of the things I find interesting, that the number of undergraduates and in Greek course, I've noticed that is either it's quite low, or they actually don't continue the course. But this is they're usually the graduate students, researchers, scholars who are actually professionally working and have a certain research interest. These are the cases that actually want to continue learning Greek. And I find that example, that is a learner who actually left the course because they in a way fulfilled their purpose. I find that very interesting as well. This is one of the reasons I think digital classics can uh, fill the gaps in a way by doing it much more efficiently. So if a certain learner needs to learn a certain for example tool just to do their work, it probably gives them the opportunity and saves them a lot of time. They don't need to to actually spend 2 years learning Greek, so they can, for example, see what a particular word means in Plato. So that is something that they can learn by 4 hours of uh, a Greek course that is using digital tools for this exact purpose.
yeah, I think this is important because maybe this is our perspective because we are humanists, and so we have a specific idea for learning and then teaching also ancient Greek. But this is when we begin to have a mixed audience, of course, we can discover new needs. Maybe we have, yes, people, they are not really interested in learning very well ancient Greek, but they have a specific need. I know that because also in Leipzig, I have different students with different backgrounds in my courses, and maybe they want just to know the basic of ancient Greek because I don't know, they work more on the computational aspect. They want to have a sense of the language, but they don't need, of course, to become um, only to have a better knowledge of the language. This, I think, this is interesting. This is, I think, very interesting because the mixed audience is bringing new needs, and also for us, we can organize in a different way our courses. So I think this is very interesting. And okay, we have a comment in the chat. Anise, our colleague from Araraquara in Brazil. Okay. Okay, yes, we have another community, yes, working with Portuguese. This is interesting. So you can find similar situations when teaching Greek. Yeah. Okay, it's interesting to see. Well, I think in the end, yes, everywhere. The thing is that we should expand these courses, and the opportunity in a digital environment is really that we can reach a big audience. In this sense, we are very flexible because we don't have a specific curriculum and specific courses. Well, then I have another question concerning the alignment, and thank you really for showing so many examples. So the first thing is that the first question is that at the beginning you mentioned, okay, that as far as I understand, with this course you start really from the basic, teaching the alphabet, but after how many classes can you ask your students to align ancient Greek and Persian? So
I think it was so. I actually the part in the I explained which parts of the grammar they actually learned before they did this alignment, and
yeah.
uh, as I mentioned, I actually made a Persian replica of Professor Crane's course.
Yeah.
Not as good, of course, but in a way, it followed the same pattern. So I would be able to, at least to some extent, be able to compare this alignment. In my course, it would be after the 10th session. So
Okay. Okay. Now, this is important. I'm asking because we have been discussing a lot about using, for example, aligned text for beginners. So they learn, okay, the alphabet, maybe very few grammatical rules, and they can immediately start by aligning or at least reading already aligned sentences. Okay. And we have been discussing. This is the reason why I'm asking, because if I understand that your students are beginners, so basically after 10 sessions is good. So in the sense that they should immediately try to align. And we also tried experiments in the past to try to learn a language by, first of all, by reading, okay, by visualizing already aligned sentences to try to discover the aligned words, and then progressively learning these words in the context. And then after that, of course, doing their own alignment. So I think this is a very, your experiments are very interesting in this sense because they work. And the other question I had connected to this is that I could see that there were examples with 3 texts. And this is good because in Ugarit we can align up to 3 different languages. So my question is, are you using, and sorry, maybe I missed that part in your presentation, but are you using, for example, English as a bridge language, in the sense that students, they begin to see the alignment between Persian and English, and then, or on the other side, sorry, Greek and English, and then see the Persian, and then they can use English, if they know English, as a help to go to the Greek? Is this the case or not?
So of course, I think the students of Professor Crane, although some of them didn't have English as a mother tongue, because I actually we looked at their alignments as well. Maybe I should add a comment about his student as well. They used 2 English translations, and of course the course was in English. In the online course we had in Persian, I actually asked them to align the text with the Persian translation, which was indirect, and they also had the option to add the English if they actually wanted to add the English, so it was optional. And as you see, two examples. They actually two of the learners actually added aligned English as well. We went through alignments in the class before they did this alignment as well, but they didn't do any alignment as a practice. So this was their first alignment as a practice. Otherwise, I actually did alignments of Thucydides and we discussed them in the class.
Okay. Thank you. And then another interesting aspect, of course, is that as you mentioned, so different people align two texts in different ways, and we always see that in the. I remember that a few years ago we began to discuss about producing guidelines for translation alignment, but in the end, it's extremely difficult because. Exactly, that depends on the kind of translation you have, and then because every one of us in the end can produce a different alignment. Maybe in order also to produce training data, the important thing is to be, and the difficult one is also to be consistent, in the sense that every one of us can begin to choose a method, Of course, you need time, especially when you are learning a language, and maybe, sorry, document that method. This is something that we tried in the past, but it's true. So this is the reason why producing guidelines for a translation alignment is really, well, not impossible, but definitely difficult. And this is also the beautiful thing about translations.
Yes.
Because they are always interpretations, and also the alignment part allows to keep this interpretative part of the language. Yeah.
Actually, our colleague in Brazil also mentioned this in the comments that establishing a criteria on deciding how to actually align also is a problem for them too. But at the same time, as I mentioned in the presentation, that I find this as a process that I think would give me, as the teacher of the course, some information on this learning process. So at the same time, not only I don't see it as in a way a bad thing, I try to take advantage of this situation that we're not sure how to, we don't have an exact guideline to see what the learners decide themselves, and they will try to guess why and find a way to see their learning process.
Yeah, I think this is the interesting part, and then where you can get a lot of training data, both in a computational science and in general also in a human science, in the sense that you can always discover new possibilities for aligning to text, especially when two languages are quite distant and when it's not really possible to perform a word by word alignment, definitely. Yes, so, well, I don't know if we have people, I don't know what I'm, well, anyway, we have people on YouTube, so please, if you have comments. In the meantime, so you have these, well, the slides are already on GitHub in our class outline page. And thank you, Farnoosh, for including also the alignments, the links to Ugarit, so that people can really check these passages, and also, yes, the tree banking of Professor Gorman. And then I also see that at the end we have an exercise for translating, yes, the beginning of the work of two CDDs. And you can also, yes, use the Scale viewer to read the text. Okay, and yes, in the comment of Anita, I see that this is interesting. Yes, also in Brazil we have students. Yes, they want to learn Greek for specific purposes too. So, which is something interesting in general, something that can help us really to think in a new way. So to develop different courses for specific needs. And maybe in the future also for Sunoikisis we can include more sessions in this sense. Our perspective is, of course, the digital classics part, so how to use digital technologies for learning, for studying and researching classical languages, but of course we can include other sessions specifically for students. They start with the digital technologies and then they want to learn an ancient language for a specific reason. And yes, their choices are revealing to, yes, especially for us, because we have a specific background and both as students, when we were students, and now that we are teachers. Okay, so I think that our class is now over. We are perfectly on time today. And I really thank again Farnoosh because she's really doing a great job, considering also this particular semester, but she has been really collecting a lot of data. And of course, all these alignments are important because we are looking for training data and we need manual translation alignments for to collect training data and then in the future to try to experiment with automatic translation alignment. So, and definitely for Persian, we need that. So really, I'm very, very grateful. And I'm very also happy to see how this community is growing because we began a few years ago. And I remember when you presented the first time since Sunoikisis, and now you are really producing more resources. So it's really fantastic to see how the community in Iran is growing, and also your work is okay. Your activities are producing every year more and more data. So this is really, really great. This is we can be optimistic for the future of digital classics.
And I would like to thank you as well for including me in this next session. And also, I would like to thank Professor Crane and Professor Gorman for sharing their work with me, and for especially Professor Gorman for doing all this tree banks and having the open access course, which I think was a very great starting point for this.
Yes, and of course, as we can see, both for Professor Crane and Professor Gorman, so they are working also with students, so we can see the experience in other countries, okay, working with the linguistic annotations and translation alignment also done by students in classes. So this is interesting to see how students can really contribute in an active way to producing data, concrete, real data that definitely we need today. So this is really fantastic, I think. Okay, so our session is over. I thank again my guest and also the audience. And next week we don't have our session because it's holiday in Germany, and we will have again the 8th session on May 28th. But you can find everything on GitHub in our page. And so as for now, I wish you a good afternoon again, good night. So we are in different time zones. And see you in 2 weeks, sorry, in 2 weeks. Okay, so bye-bye.
Bye.
And see you soon. Bye.